Okay, and so the other measure that we're primarily concerned with is what's called the unemployment rate. Now, this is a number that I'm, 100% certain you've seen before, you've heard about it, right? It's a number that lots of people love to think about. They spend their entire careers focused solely on this number. What might be useful is figuring out how we calculate it and what sort of problems there are with that, and what inferences we can make from statements that people make about these things. So I've written down the equation for it. It's simply the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force. Now, it's probably more useful to think about it as the number of unemployed people divided by the number of unemployed people plus the number of employed people. Right, so I've just substituted in the equation for the labor force, right, or something equivalent to the labor force in here. Okay, so it's the number of unemployed people divided by the number of unemployed people plus employed people. Okay, so this is essentially the percentage of people that are working or looking for work that are looking for work. Okay, and so when we think about this, when we think of it this way, there's lots of ways that we can sort of manipulate this number. So we used to say, you count as employed only if you're working, full time, right? Also known as, 40 hours per week or 35 hours per week, I think was the number we used to use. All right. And so that was, if you were working 35 hours per week, you were counted as employed. And we would do some fancy math and say, let's use 40 since it's simpler. Let's say, you worked two part-time 20-hour a week jobs. Well, that would count as one full-time job. Okay. And so you could be counted as a full employed person. Or let's say that there's two people, each of which is working one part-time job for 20 hours per week. We would just count them as one employed person, right? And so that would be sort of how we get around sort of weird fractions of full-time employees. Now we just count it, are you getting paid, right? So if you get paid, if you work for 10 hours a week, you count as employed. If you work for 1 hour a week, you're employed, right? All of these things are counted equally. And so what we've done, what that does, is it actually moves people who would have previously been considered unemployed into the employed category. And as a result, it lowers this fraction, right? Because I'm making this number here smaller and I'm making this number bigger, or this sum down here technically stays the same. So all I'm really doing is just reducing the top number, right? I just reduced the number of people that are unemployed, or that count as unemployed, and I can reduce the unemployment rate, right? So it's easily manipulatable by changing what we count as employed. Okay, so we can do that. Another way we can change the unemployment rate is by kicking people out of the labor force. Right, so we can kick people out of the labor force. And specifically, we can kick unemployed people. Right? If we kick unemployed people out of the labor force, we're also going to reduce the unemployment rate. Now, I'm going to say a very grotesque thing, and for that I apologize, but there was a famous economist, I'm not going to name him, who said, look, there's a very simple solution there's a very simple way to lowering the unemployment rate. Here's what we do. We could just, for want of a better term, we could just kill anyone who's unemployed. Okay? And as that sounds awful, right? And I'm not disputing that it's awful. I'm not trying to defend that position at all. Okay? But what I am trying to suggest is that if we were to do that, yes, this number here would go down, but this number here would also go down here, right? Which means we've got both the top and the bottom going down. And if you remember your limit definitions, if you remember limits, so the limit as unemployed approaches 0 of the unemployment rate, I'll just abbreviate labor force, is going to be equal to 0, right? So if I just if I literally just kill all the unemployed people, the unemployment rate will go to zero, right? But what's perhaps more humanely is to actually switch them from unemployed to discouraged. Remember, discouraged workers do not count as unemployed because they're not looking for work. Okay, so at one point a few years ago, I had the opportunity to work for the Joint Economic Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. Okay, and one of the things that we did is, we looked at Bureau of Labor Statistics data and Bureau of Economic Analysis data and Congressional Budget Office data and all kinds of data from all the government offices, and we would analyze it. That was like our job. Okay, and this is a nonpartisan committee. I happened to work under a Republican at the time, but he's since retired, and it was a nonpartisan committee. Okay, and what we did is we provided the analysis of the data. Okay, so some people at a hearing, came up and said, this was in 2010, I believe. They came up and said, look, isn't President Obama doing well? He's reduced the unemployment rate below 8%. Okay, and it's true. This fraction did come out to 0.08. Right, which is 8%, right, or 0.78%, something like that. So 7.8%, and that's true. I don't dispute that. Nothing about it. But what the policies actually accomplished was forcing people to basically give up looking for work, and we were able to document that by looking at the number of discouraged workers, which the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, does track. Okay, and so at the time, about 500,000 people switched from being unemployed to discouraged. Well, if you got 500,000 people, if you're taking 500,000 out of these numbers here, that's going to have a big impact on the unemployment rate. And so when we added them back in, the unemployment rate jumped back up to about 11%, which was what it was prior to the Obama administration. And so the claim that the unemployment rate was down and that was unambiguously good was false. Right? It actually was the opposite. The unemployment rate was low because so many people had quit looking for work. Okay? And so if we want to fix labor markets, the one thing we want to avoid doing, or we should want to avoid doing, is making it so that people don't even bother looking for work. Right? If the labor market is so bad that people just say, screw it, forget it, we're not going to bother looking, that's not exactly a good thing. Right? It might make a low unemployment rate, but that would be a misleading number. Okay, so the unemployment rate is not some measure that is completely, for want of a better word, it's not completely like objective, right? So like temperature is an objective number, right? The unemployment rate is not, right? There's a difference between those two, and I want to go into it, but if I do, this video will turn into about an hour long. It's a philosophy of science argument. It's a great thing, but if you think about it, this unemployment rate is nowhere near as like objective or hard and true as temperature is, or how long a foot is, right? 12 inches is 1 foot. We know exactly how long a foot is. It's not context specific. There's no underlying trickery there, right? This number is not as objective as those things. Okay, there's lots of things going on underneath it that go into calculating this number, and all of those things can be very easily manipulated, and you can get unemployment rates that will be the same, but they'll mean very different things. So, an unemployment rate of 8% might be a very good thing if it's the case that people are quitting their jobs because they are finding better jobs, right? So a high unemployment rate could be a good thing if it's the case that people are constantly between better jobs, right? That could be a great thing. An unemployment rate of 8% could be a terrible thing if no one can find a job. But the point is that that number, 8%, will be the same in both cases, but it will mean fundamentally different things. Okay, so the unemployment rate, while it's important, it's an important number. I'm not trying to dispute that. it's equally, if not more important, to understand what's going on underneath that number. Okay, don't just look at the average, basically. So think of the unemployment rate as sort of an average of a whole bunch of things going on. But that average could be very misleading. My favorite example of this is to say that, look, the average person on the planet, has one breast, one ovary, and one testicle, right? We've never seen a person like that, right? Is born, I should say, is born with those factors, right? And we've never seen that happen, okay? And so the average person doesn't exist, right? But it might be useful to talk about people in average as long as we understand the context in which we're talking about those averages. Okay, so anytime you hear people talk about the unemployment rate, keep in mind the underlying context of what's going on. Keep in mind what's actually being measured and how that number can easily be manipulated or be misleading if you don't understand all the things going on. Okay, so there you are.